It's all a massive con. It's a huge distraction. And it's being perpetrated purely so the ruling class can stay on their gravy train and continue to line their pockets. Hello, and welcome back to Evolve Politics TV. I'm Tom D. Rogers, and today I want to talk about immigration. More specifically, I want to talk about how the UK government, aided and abetted by their lackeys in the mainstream media, have entirely manufactured the so-called small boats crisis and are intentionally prolonging the situation purely for their own mutual benefit. So, if we're to believe the constant stream of articles and headlines churned out by the mainstream media over the last year or so, and the actual words of the Home Secretary Suella Braverman, England is currently in the grip of an unprecedented invasion. According to them, countless hordes of illegal economic migrants, mainly from Albania and other apparently safe countries, are supposedly swarming to Britain across the channel in dinghies, supposedly to steal all of our jobs whilst simultaneously sitting on unemployment benefits. Due to this supposedly record-breaking influx, Britain's asylum processing system has, they claim, now become so overwhelmed that immigration detention centres are at breaking point, and the government has been forced to house asylum seekers in hotels across the country, costing the taxpayer around £7 million every single day. The situation has, unsurprisingly, led to a feeding frenzy among the right-wing press, with streams of articles and headlines insisting that Britain is full up already, that there aren't enough houses or jobs to go around already, and pointing to the fact that our public services are already quite overstretched. This increasingly febrile atmosphere has already led to numerous violent far-right protests outside hotels housing asylum seekers. Self-proclaimed migrant hunters are now routinely targeting refugee accommodation, and there was even an anti-immigration terrorist firebomb attack on an asylum detention centre in Dover in October. However, this situation isn't anything new, and believe it or not, the government actually wants things to be like this. Indeed, all the evidence shows that this so-called crisis has been entirely manufactured and intentionally stoked up by the media, purely for their own mutual benefit. And in this video, I'll explain exactly how they did it and why. So, why are asylum seekers crossing the channel in the first place? Well, firstly, believe it or not, there's actually no legitimate way for the vast majority of asylum seekers to actually claim asylum in the UK. Currently, there are only 3 safe and legal routes to enter the UK, and these only apply to a very select number of people who meet strict criteria and are fleeing the countries of Afghanistan, Ukraine and Hong Kong. Secondly, unless you meet these criteria, which the overwhelming proportion of asylum seekers don't, then the government rules state that you actually have to physically be in the country in order to claim asylum. This means that refugees from some of the most dangerous countries around the world, many of whom have links to the UK through family, speak the language and would choose to come here and benefit society if they could, have absolutely no legal route to claim asylum here. The absurd reality of the current system was summed up perfectly during a Home Affairs Committee hearing back in November, in an exchange between Tory MP Tim Loughton and the Home Secretary Suella Braverman.
Let's do a bit of role play. I'm a 16-year-old orphan from an East African country escaping a war zone and religious persecution. And I have a sibling legally in the United Kingdom at the moment. What is a safe and legal route for me to come to the United Kingdom?
Well, we have... you're fleeing which country, sorry?
Any African country.
Any African country. Well,
be any continent, but let's say any African country. I don't want to name one because then their Prime Minister might have a go at me for demonising their population. So let's just theoretically talk about an African country which is going through a period of turbulence and which is persecuting its citizens, including an innocent 16-year-old like me.
Well, we have an asylum system and people can put in applications for asylum.
How would I do that?
Well, you can do it through the safe and legal routes that we have. We have offered 390,000 places to people seeking safety from various countries around the world.
I'm not Syrian, I'm not Afghan, I'm not Ukrainian, not any of those specific schemes. The Dub scheme is historic. What scheme's open to me?
Well, if you are able to get to the UK, you are able to put in an application for asylum.
But I would only enter the UK illegally then, wouldn't I?
Well, that would, if you put in your application for asylum upon arrival, that would be the process that you enter.
How could I arrive in the UK if I didn't have permission to get onto an aircraft legally to arrive in the UK?
Let me just invite other colleagues if there's anything they want to add.
I mean, you could engage with UNHCR. I mean, depending which country you're from, you could engage with UNHCR, and that would be a way of getting leave to enter the UK in order to put in an asylum claim. But I accept that there are some countries where that would not be possible.
I think the point is that there's a shortage of safe and legal routes other than for specific groups of people that we have generously offered safe haven to.
In addition, whilst it's true that the number of asylum seekers using small boats to enter the UK has increased dramatically over the last few years, the overall number of people applying for asylum in this country has only slightly increased on recent levels, and it certainly isn't at record levels as some would have you believe. What's actually happening is simply alternative logistics. Before 2019, most asylum seekers attempted to enter Britain in the back of lorries, crossing through ports from France. However, mainly due to increased checks at the French border, implemented because of Brexit, this has become increasingly difficult, meaning that people smugglers are now choosing to move groups of asylum seekers via boats across the Channel rather than lorries through ports. The UK representative to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Rossella Pagliucci-Law, explained the situation succinctly during a parliamentary committee hearing, stating, "The overall number of people entering the UK irregularly hasn't changed, it's pretty stable. What has happened is simply that smuggling rings moved from moving people largely through trucks and other vehicles to using boats. And the reason? One of the reasons is the securitization of the border and the fact that there are far more controls on trucks and lorries than there were before. I think it has to do with Brexit. That has reduced the truck vehicular traffic. COVID has been fundamental, because for months there has been hardly any way. Of course, smuggling rings are nothing if not incredibly adaptable. They've moved their business from trucks and vehicular movement to boats. But this does not represent a change in either the nature of those who travel or the nature of the movement. It's simply from one to the other." So another question people ask is, why don't asylum seekers just stay in the first safe country that they reach? Well, the fact is that the vast majority of them do. Statistics show that around 3/4 of all refugees flee to neighbouring countries. For instance, Turkey, which borders war-torn Syria, now hosts more than 3.5 million of the 5.6 million Syrian refugees, whilst of the 3.4 million people to have fled Afghanistan, around 2.2 million are hosted by neighbouring Iran and Pakistan. And when it comes to the 8 million Ukrainian refugees, around 4.4 million of them have fled to either Russia or Poland next door, with Germany granting asylum to over 1 million as well. In comparison, over the same time frame, the UK has granted asylum to just 161,000 Ukrainians, around 20,000 Syrians, and around the same number of Afghans, a tiny percentage of the overall total. And then, when compared to our closest European neighbours, Britain takes in fewer asylum seekers than Austria, Slovenia, Greece, Germany, Belgium, Bulgaria, France, Switzerland, Holland, Lithuania, Spain and Sweden as a proportion of their overall population. So why do asylum seekers want to come to the UK in the first place? Around half of all asylum seekers who make their applications in the UK do so because they already have family living here. The other half have various other reasons, but the main one is that they already speak the language fluently and they think it will help them settle into society a whole lot easier. The media often claim that many asylum seekers only make the perilous journey across the Channel because our welfare system is supposedly a lot more generous to them than other countries. But this is patently untrue. Whilst waiting for their applications to be processed in the UK, all asylum seekers are prohibited from carrying out any paid work in the UK, and they're not entitled to state benefits either. Instead, they receive temporary accommodation plus £45 a week, but not in cash, it's in the form of a prepayment card to buy essentials such as food, clothing, medication and toiletries. Yet in France, asylum seekers are entitled to a very similar weekly allowance and the same type of accommodation, but with the added benefit that they're entitled to work after just 6 months if their application hasn't been processed yet. In the UK, asylum seekers can only apply for permission to work if their application hasn't been processed after 12 months. Whilst in Germany, the asylum welfare system is even better than France and the UK, with asylum seekers able to claim around £65 a week and be eligible to work after just 3 months. And when it comes to the generosity of state benefits, which asylum seekers in this country are only entitled to claim if they're granted leave to remain, the UK ranks extremely poorly compared to our close European neighbours such as Denmark, Sweden, Italy, Spain and Germany. In addition, the government and the media routinely claim that most people crossing the Channel are simply economic migrants rather than genuine refugees. However, more than 3/4 of all UK asylum applications, 77% to be exact, were approved in 2022, meaning that this narrative clearly isn't true. So how did the government intentionally manufacture this crisis? Well, the fact is that the solution to this crisis is incredibly simple. If the government really wanted to stop the Channel crossings, literally all they have to do is open safe and legal routes for all asylum seekers, or simply allow people to claim asylum from outside the UK. This would immediately end the need for asylum seekers to take such extraordinary risks to reach our shores, and it would also put the people smugglers out of business overnight. But the government continually refuses to do so. Why? Well, it's clearly not because of how much implementing such measures might cost. Currently, the UK is spending around £2.5 billion a year in hotel bills to house asylum seekers awaiting their decisions, all because of a decade of unprecedented Tory mismanagement in the Home Office. According to research by the Institute for Government, over the past 11 years, the government has systematically increased bureaucracy and scrapped standards within the asylum decision-making process, changes which have resulted in plummeting productivity and an astonishing backlog of over 160,000 pending decisions, an 800% increase on 2011. The UK currently employs 1,237 asylum decision makers, yet to employ 1,000 more for a whole year, it would cost the equivalent of 4 days' hotel bills, or just £27.5 million a year. However, simply fixing the truly absurd productivity problem that the Home Office has somehow created would be an even cheaper fix. And the government's continual failure to solve this apparent crisis isn't through lack of implementing solutions either. It's just that all the solutions they have tried have been, strangely enough, catastrophic and intentionally divisive failures. Take for example their widely derided scheme to send asylum seekers to be processed in Rwanda, a policy which has so far cost the taxpayer £140 million, and precisely 0 applications have actually been processed there. And not only is this plan intentionally barbaric, which divides the public against each other rather than focusing their ire on the government, it's also ridiculously expensive, inefficient, and ultimately doomed to failure. And now, in yet another attempted solution to the problem, Rishi Sunak has just unveiled legislation which would simply ban Channel crossers from applying for asylum here, whilst at the same time opening absolutely no alternative safe and legal routes for them, in direct contravention of international law and the 1951 Refugee Convention, of which the UK is a signatory. And as a result, surprise, surprise, this impending legislation is sure to create yet more arguments among ordinary people, and even bigger legal problems for the government. Hence, more division, more delay, and an even bigger problem at the end of it. But, as is surely becoming quite clear to you already, that's the entire point. So, you're probably asking yourself, why on earth would any government intentionally screw something so important up, and waste a whole bunch of public money in the process? Well, firstly, as has been emphasised quite a lot previously, the government is just intentionally trying to cause division among the public. Why? Because people are justifiably angry at the state of our country right now. The NHS is broken, people can't get a GP appointment, waiting lists are at unprecedented levels, ambulance wait times are counted in days rather than minutes, and people are literally dying in corridors because there simply aren't enough staff to cope. And then there's the so-called cost of living crisis, with the price of everything such as food, transport, energy, and other essentials going through the roof. Whilst Liz Truss's astonishingly stupid mini-budget caused interest rates to soar, and left the Tories' core voter base, middle-aged homeowners, facing rocketing mortgage costs. Elsewhere, the police are now so underfunded and understaffed that they essentially don't investigate crimes anymore. Teachers are having to buy school supplies out of their own pockets and bring in food for malnourished kids, all whilst corruption and cronyism run rampant among the ruling class. Meanwhile, poverty is soaring, rough sleeping is through the roof, and food bank usage has somehow become the norm, all whilst wages are falling and welfare is being cut. And that's just for starters. Yet, despite all of these catastrophic systemic failures, which have so obviously been caused by the government and their own actions, what are the establishment, in both the media and the ruling class, trying to get us to argue about? Immigration! It's all a massive con. It's a huge distraction. And it's being perpetrated purely so the ruling class can stay on their gravy train and continue to line their pockets, with absolutely no concern for the fact that their actions are burning our country to the ground. Yet, for as long as we keep falling for it, for as long as we keep arguing amongst ourselves, and for as long as we keep failing to realise that we have much more in common with any refugee than we do with any Tory MP, the longer that we and our country will continue to suffer. The only people to blame for this crisis are the people who make the decisions. It's time we finally started blaming the powerful, not the powerless. Thank you so much for watching. This cat has been annoying me throughout the entire recording process of this video. So, yeah, I hope you appreciate the effort that has been put into the video. Don't forget to please subscribe to the channel. Please like the video as well, because it really helps boost the video in the YouTube algorithm. And if you want to see this cat again, here's Minnie Moo. Look at the Minnie Moo. She is an absolute little baby. She's only, what is she? You're about 6 months old now, aren't you? Yeah, if you want to see her again, then subscribe to the channel, and yeah, I will see you in the next one. Take care.